Hey guys, Bugcat7 here. Okay, it is Thursday, February 4th, 2021, and I'd like to thank you for visiting the Stonewall Research channel here on YouTube. I really do appreciate it. All right, guys, you know how I like to do videos about some very interesting and controversial things in between doing the series on the quote unquote giants or large hominids international that I'm doing right now, part two of my series here. And this is a related topic, and I thought you might be interested in hearing about these things. I certainly am. But some of the things that, we look at here, taken from mainstream often, and, from what we've gathered so far, we can put together quite a few things ourselves. But what I really want to talk about in this video is these anomalous tribes of North America, which I sort of want to think of as out of place peoples, like out of place peeps, you know. Where's my peeps at, as I usually say when the holidays come around and those marshmallow treats with the sugar or colored sugar, all of them are chickens always at the local CVS, chemist shop and convenience store here in the Americas, for anybody that doesn't know. I'm like, yo, where's my peeps at? I love those things. But in any case, this might be these out of place peoples. Like, the thing is that there's no clear historical evidence of where they may come from, and it's really contingent upon the Windover bog people. I don't know if anybody knows this. Probably, if you're doing this sort of research, you might know about the Windover bog people. These people who were unearthed by bulldozer when they're doing some developing land development in Florida there, and they found these peoples here, and evidently there's several anomalous things about them, including the fact that some of the brain tissue was still evident in these archaeological burial site, which was dated to be some 5 to 6,000 years old, going by the peat bog that they were found in there. So I did a video about it on my channel, and it's just, forget about what it says in Wikipedia, the baloney online encyclopedia here, because they're just going by some sort of, public press statement about this or whatever, but it's totally false of what the findings are, actually. And I cover this in a video on my channel and about how these people here on this panel here, and one of these, this lady right here wrote a book about this in the 90s or the early 2000s. I'm not sure. I don't remember right now. But she wrote about DNA analysis on it, about how it was all Native American and blah, blah, blah. But however, this panel I was convened here, this sort of seminar, whatever it might be, a sort of lecture or I don't know, symposium or something like that, where they're giving some sort of public statements here about how they want to hire somebody from University of in Connecticut there, and there's some woman there from university there from I don't know, Stanford, I believe. And, I just wanted somebody to hire to put a label on it for them, to put their, blessing on it. And I did a lot of research into it. And this panel was convened in 2015, where they're still calling for DNA analysis of the remains. Okay, they've done the DNA analysis. I've gone over it, went over it in this video. Okay, this revisionist history knowledge filter. Okay, they don't want to upset and the Native Americans and all this kind of stuff about any sort of white European DNA kicking around since 5 and 6,000 years ago here. Okay, so they just want somebody to put their name on it, just pay somebody to do it. And, evidently the woman that they had planned on using decided that she was not going to put her name on it. Just was wrong or whatever it is. She doesn't want to be associated with that. She has a reputation to think about, right? So nobody's done anything on it since this panel was convened here by the University of Florida. This is the head anthropologist there, and this woman here wrote this book about it. It was totally baloney. Okay, and they're still calling for DNA analysis, whereas Wikipedia article just says, yeah, this is what it is. They did DNA. It's all native. No baloney. It is. Besides the fact that it went to an independent laboratory that said it was European DNA, and of course, the laboratory also has a reputation to think about themselves. Okay, you can't just go around saying they're wrong when they've done the research and stick by it. Okay, because you get into lawsuits and everything. That's probably why they're doing this, because they challenged on this their findings. But now they just want somebody to put their blessing on it and just pay them to do it. They can't get anybody to do it because people maybe are more interested in a different sort of past. Okay, that might be revealing itself. All right, so let's talk about these anomalous tribes of North America here. That, want to seriously get into a little bit deeper here. I'll read you these articles here. We'll just try not to comment too much on it, but you have to tie it back to that, because if it's possible for these people to be here 5,000 and 6,000 years ago, okay, where is all this European DNA coming in, these anomalous tribes and all this kind of stuff? It coming from any number of sources, but refer back to all the things we've talked about in the videos in the past about the quote unquote giants and what these people were doing in the past. And not a lot of these fanciful ideas that, just sound really great, but they're specious, because it's just pure speculation on their part where we can relate it to things that seem tangible. All right, so this is from the University of California, the UCR here. Education is some whatever campus it is there in California, the University of California. Okay, so this article was put together in 2017 about the mysterious tribe of blue-eyed Native Americans. So it's interesting what is said in here. I think you're going to be very interested in these things. Okay, you make of it what you will, but again, refer back to what you know already from watching many videos on my channel here. It's a bigger picture than they even can think for themselves, because maybe they haven't tied any number of things together like we have right here. Okay, so just think about these things when it's when you hear it. So, these are the Aborigines of Minnesota from Winchell, 1911, is giving some of the accounts of it, actual accounts that they're taking as credible accounts from this university, report here. The first reports of what would come to be known as the Mandan tribe began to trickle out from French explorers in the region of the Missouri River in present-day North and South Dakota in the early 1700s. These natives were said to have rather fair skin and to have red or blonde hair or blue or gray eyes, and indeed, especially the women were reportedly so Nordic in appearance that if it were not for their clothing, they were said to be nearly indistinguishable from whites. In 1738, the French-Canadian trader Sieur de la Vérendrye made the first official outside contact with the Mandan and described them as living in 9 villages at a tributary of the Missouri River called the Heart River, and noted that they also exhibited customs that were decidedly more European than the neighboring tribes. By 1784, the word had gotten out on this mysterious tribe of blue-eyed Indians, and they were featured in the media, with the August 24, 1784 edition of the Pennsylvania Packet and Daily Advertiser proclaiming that a new tribe of white people had been discovered and that they were, quote, acquainted with the principles of the Christian religion, unquote, and, quote, extremely courteous and civilized, unquote. Isn't that very interesting? Perhaps one of the more famous of the explorers to come across the Mandan was none other than Lewis and Clark, who visited the tribe in 1804 and described them as quote-unquote half-white, as well as peaceful, civilized, courteous, and polite. They also noted that the tribe's numbers had dwindled significantly to the frequent smallpox epidemics that terrorized them, as well as attacks against them by neighboring tribes, namely the Assiniboine, Lakota, Arikara, and the Sioux. Of course, this all led to the intense speculation as to what the origins were of this bizarre tribe, and one of the earliest ideas put forward was that they were descendants of pre-Columbian explorers to the New World. For instance, there were many legends from various regions of the present-day United States of Welsh-speaking natives, perhaps descended from Welsh settlers coming to the shore in the 12th century. In particular, a Prince Madoc, who, along with his followers, who was said to have immigrated to the America from Wales in about 1170. Okay, so just keep in mind, again, from my video, the Frisian giants and what academics had said there about the um, uh, the Vikings building these primitive stone forts in these islands offshore from mainland over there in Holland and Germany. Okay, they made these forts to establish trade with the Frisian giants over there. Okay, this was their main aim. This was their main goal. This was their main motivation. Okay, as many civilizations as we know from the past. It's not a surprise or anything like that. It shouldn't come to any surprise. But, people want to make all kinds of fanciful tales out of it or whatever, these adventures and tales and, maybe at the beginning or whatever it is. But then you had repeated, trade agreements going on. Again, all these dynamics that go along with trade that are not discussed in these things, okay, because they don't take it to that next level. But here we heard about with the Frisian giants that this is what the Vikings were doing. So evidence in the Americas about Vikings or whatever it is, okay, is not should not be surprising. And what are they doing here? Well, they're doing the same thing what they do with the Frisian giants. Trade. This is the motivation. This is very clear. Okay, it's not. Just relax. Okay, so it's just think people do these things and this is what they're involved with in their lives and everything, and just today and every day everywhere, blah blah blah. Okay, so one explorer who believed that the Mandan had European roots, perhaps even Welsh, was the frontiersman and pictorial historian George Catlin, who's a famous historian who went across America here to record these things and all these fabulous pictures and paintings and everything. Just wonderful. You can see it at your local library if they have a good collection of books there. Just take it out, look at it, just amazing stuff. Who spent several months with the tribe in North Dakota, living amongst and drawing and painting them in 1832. One of the things that first struck him about these mysterious people was just how European they looked, describing that many of them were nearly white and had light hair and blue eyes, and he also noticed that they had more advanced techniques for manufacturing goods and dwellings, customs, traditions, town layouts, language vastly different from neighboring tribes. Caitlin would say of the Mandan, I'm going to read this quote from him here. But just before that, just to refer back to some of my research on my own channel here, when Verrazano got here, one of the explorers to actually come here to North America and to Long Island specifically, when he met the peoples that were here, he likened them to whites. And not only that, he was surprised that they were bigger in size to them. Not only taller, bigger in size and looking white to him, and had a tawny color as well. But not only that, Verrazano said that they were beautiful. Okay. And their clothing and the way that they adorn themselves and everything, just were just a surprise to Verrazano of how amazingly well kept these people were with fancy hairdos and whatnot, bigger people and likened to wine. So this is like, 100 years before this. 100 years or 200 years before this, you know, in the 15s or whatever it is, so 200 plus years. So, not, this is not the first people to come across these sorts of people in the Americas. Verrazano was one of them, and I used to talk about it on my channel here. Quote, they are very interesting and pleasing people in their personal appearance and manners, differing in many respects, both in looks and customs, from all the other tribes I have seen. So forcibly have I been struck with the peculiar ease and elegance of these people, together with their diversity of complexions, the various colors of their hair and eyes, and singularity of their language, and their peculiar and unaccountable customs, that I am fully convinced that they have sprung from some other origin than that of other North American tribes, or that they are an amalgam of natives with some civilized race, unquote. Okay, so here's Caitlin thinking that they are amalgam with some civilized race. Okay, so before we go on, okay, so if anybody's thinking, is there some sort of pure DNA in the world that we can have some sort of template so we can compare with our own DNA against this template of pure DNA wherever it is in the world? Okay, if you're thinking if you're Asian or whatever, doesn't matter where you're in the world. You think there's this pure DNA in the world? Okay, well, think again, folks, because there's no such thing as pure DNA, European or anyone else, including Native American, okay? Harvard geneticists, no population's DNA is pure. It's just, there is no pure DNA in the world to make a comparison with. So this whole baloney about some pure DNA here and there or whatever it is probably so incredibly rare that, it's just unheard of. Everybody has some sort of amalgam, including I've read in some articles and whatnot of this mystery DNA, which they found recently in these Africans. Okay, just sort of mystery DNA out of nowhere. Some other peoples have no idea what they were. Even some of the legends of the Mandan people themselves expressly mention that they had been descended from a strange white man who appeared to them aboard a canoe in ancient times after an enormous flood had wiped out everything in sight. These could be referred to, okay, in Charles C. Mann's book, which I know I've reviewed on this channel and we know about, okay, about the millions of people living here in the Americas, okay. The Spanish historians themselves, okay, said about Central America that during the period of the conquistadors, that something to like 14 to 19 million people died. That's their estimate, okay, of the conquistadors' exploits over there through disease and violence and everything else. And Cabeza de Vaca, speaking about anomalous peoples in the Americas, not only found giant peoples here in the Americas, okay, when he was shipwrecked from the failed Narvaez expedition with two companions and trekked across the bottom of United States, of what we call the United States, North America here, and finally made his way to conquistadors and found out they were bashing babies' heads out on rocks and whatnot, and went back to Spain and reported on it, and they told him to shut up. And he's like the anti-hero, and everybody worships these conquistadors who are just savage barbarians, okay? Cabeza de Vaca is the hero. He went back to Spain and ratted him out, and they just told him, look, we're doing good business over there. Just relax. Here's some money. Shut up. Get out of here before they throw you in jail. Okay, so they claim that the stranger had taught them about medicine and had influenced their religion, which oddly featured many of the same beasts as Christianity, such as a great flood, a virgin birth, and a child born who could work magical miracles, among others. This was noticed by other later expeditions as well, such as the 1833 to 34 expedition led by German naturalist A.P. Maximilian, who felt that the similarities between Christianity and the Mandan religion were too close to being mere coincidence. Caitlin would write of this. It would seem that these people must have had some proximity to some part of the civilized world, such as missionaries or other having formerly among them, inculcating the Christian religion and the Mosaic account of the flood, unquote. So that's what they gathered from these people, just amazingly how similar things are. And just the Jesuits, when they got to China and examined all the things about the I Ching, Book of Changes, and what Confucius was teaching the people, seemed so close to Christianity. So these ideas floating around in Christianity, maybe Christianity's older than we think, guys. And it's just another anomalous thing there. But it's so interesting what's being said here. It just resembles, again, we're going back to the Iroquois and me saying about the Hopewell here and about the stranger and everything sounds like the great peacemaker again of the Iroquois myth, the Haudenosaunee myth. All right, maybe one of these big men of the past. Who are these big men of the past? Well, maybe they were giants. This is how it's relative to the giants, and including the skin pigmentations and everything else, and hair colors and blah, 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 all that stuff. very weird combinations as well. Okay, like these blonde-haired people here. All right, so another idea on the Mandan origins is that they came from pre-Columbian visitations by Viking explorers. The first official European to ever officially make contact with the Mandan tribe, Sir de la Vendry, claimed that at the time he had found a strange rune stone with Nordic inscriptions on a riverside near the village. The stone was sent to Jesuit scholars in Quebec, who determined the writing on the stone was Tartarian, a runic script similar to Futark. The stone was later sent to France to be studied, but it is unclear what happened to the Verendrye runestone after that. Isn't that interesting? I thought you might be interested in that. The idea of Vikings in the New World before the days of Columbus has been talked about for some time, with one prevalent and somewhat controversial theory having to do with Eric Thorwaldsen, also more famously known as the Red, who established the two colonies on the coast of Greenland in 986. The story goes that Eric the Red then abandoned these outposts when the wild, rugged land proved to be too cold and forbidding, and made his way to North America along with the colonists. The theory then claims that the king of Norway is then to said have sent an expedition to the New World to point out what happened to them, and that this expedition made their way up the rivers to end up in the Dakotas and other areas, after which they became stranded and then assimilated into the native tribes, giving them their Nordic genes. However, there is very little evidence to prove the Vikings ever actually reached North America. The Varengi runestone vanished without a trace, and there's the hotly debated Kensington runestone, which was a giant slab covered in ruins, allegedly found by Swedish immigrant Olof Ullman in Minnesota in 1898. In this case, the inscriptions claim that the ruins have been created by 14th century Scandinavian explorers. Okay, so it's interesting, these rune stones again and all this kind of stuff. Again, referring back to the Frisian giants there in the coast of Holland. Again, these people, what are they doing here in a place where there is millions and millions of people already? All right, establishing base camp or whatever. This is what is done in the dynamics of trade relationships, where the guarantee of these goods and items are to, and the flow of these things, especially the copper, which I believe is mentioned in this article here, or another one that we're going to read from. But it's just interesting that this is not related to that. Okay, so maybe that's more recent research about what the Vikings were doing there. Maybe they never thought of that until just recently. There in Friesland, there in Holland, but this is evidently what the Vikings were interested in: trade. This is what they might be doing there. And perhaps, again, all of this suggesting, and all of these anomalous tribes in the Americas, whatever, whoever they may be, may reckon to a past in which the America here, especially North America, was more cosmopolitan than we think. All right? And because there's a different past to be considered here that's, not discussed at all, and not supposed about. But there's plenty of evidence to suggest it. Regardless of where the Mandan really came from, the fact is that we will probably never know for sure. In 1838, the tribe was hit by a devastating smallpox epidemic, and although this was a specter they had been haunted by for centuries, this time it was absolutely catastrophic, wiping them out at such a rate that after only a few months, there were only an estimated 30 to 140 of them left. With the Mandan teetering on the edge of extinction, enemy tribes swept in and took them as slaves, after which they were assimilated and absorbed. Okay, so they went extinct there in 1838, or around that time, if we were to take this history to be correct. Consequent intermarriage and interbreeding meant that any unique genetic heritage they may have had was quickly erased, and the last known full-blooded Mandan was Matty Grinnell, who died in 1971. Since there are no more full-blooded Mandan left and only an estimated 8 speakers of its language left today, it is difficult to get a grip on their heritage. Even with our advanced DNA testing techniques, and their origins and history will likely forever remain shrouded in mystery, leaving us to merely speculate and debate on it. And that is the truth, folks. Even with all this DNA research, they cannot determine it. They don't know what came first and when this DNA got mixed. And if this is really the way it happened in this sequence or that sequence, they can't tell any of that, okay? It's all scrambled up and mixed up. So everything else is just pure speculation about what these people are, how they got there. And there's only one reasonable explanation in their minds, and it has to go along with the current narrative that, is given by academics. Based on that, is to come up with the only explanation for these people. And there can be no others. That, they risk, anybody who would suggest otherwise would risk ridicule. But here it is being considered by some mainstream academics here in California University. Okay, so they have to, because these things are there. They're not going away. You see, and they have to explain some of these things which can't be explained. Right, but the situation is not something that they have correct, because they don't understand what the Vikings were truly doing here and how many people were here in the past. As more research by Charles C. Mann. It is somewhat sad that this tribe disappeared before we were ever able to really comprehend who they were. All we are left with is the tales and accounts from explorers, but other than their legacy has evaporated into the tides of history. They are vanished people who sowed bafflement and wonder, but ultimately left numerous questions swirling about them, doomed to a limbo of superstition, speculation, and rumor. Who were these people? Why did they look and act so differently? And what was the meaning behind their strange ways? To alien explorers just starting to penetrate this wilderness at the time, they may have seemed to be baffling anomalies, and interesting they still are. The Great Oasis. That brings me to another theory bearing similarities. The Great Oasis, 900 to 1100 AD. This culture, which primarily claimed the territory ranging from Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota, and southwestern Minnesota, has been studied by the Iowa State archaeologist. The culture was first identified by Lloyd Wilford in 1945. His excavations not only revealed in southwest Minnesota intense occupation with numerous pits, but also discovery of squared houses with keyhole entrances. See LiDAR images as possible examples. Some site illustrated long rectangular structures built into a shallow pit about 18 inches deep. When collapsed, it would resemble a tumuli, which would be a mound. Within each structure, a central fireplace and many cache pits were constructed. The pits were used for storage until spoilage and contaminated by rodents, at which time they were filled in with earth. When archaeologists excavated the pits, they found broken pottery, discarded stone and bone tools, as well as animal and plant remains. These sites are semi-permanent structures designed to be utilized during the winter months. Investigations into the mound builders, 3500 BC's, Aborigines of Minnesota, Winchell 1911, discovered the earthworks in the Ohio Valley were recent and later than the first sites in Iowa, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, as indicated by the total absence of signs of the elephant or mastodon. These early sites seem to have the acquaintance with the elephant, confirmed by petroglyphs of mammoth drawings. Ancient Norse exploration in America, and this guy covers it in another article, perhaps go over it at a different time, but they entertain these thoughts, okay? So the Vikings in Greenland began to arrive in America about 800 AD. The word Viking means valley place in the Norse language. The name originates from about 800 AD, when the Norse occupied the valleys of England, driving those who resisted into the hills. A possible visit to North America between 1019 and 1066 by Nordic Viking King Harald Sigurdsson Hadrad has been proposed by some groups studying Viking explorations. They suggest about 200 boats and 3,000 Norsemen arrived with him. Some founded temporary settlements along the east coast of Canada, while others rowed to the Christian Sea, known as the Hudson Bay, then up the Nelson and Red Rivers over the Minnesota tableland into the Mississippi River. Eventually, they returned to Norse territory in England. Those Norse may have used the same route as was suggested for the Bronze Age copper explorations. Decipherments of drawings on sticks suggest that they were Christians who recited Genesis as a rowing chant. Well documented in scientific literature, Sigurdsson and his men lost the battle with the English at Stratford Bridge. Sigurdsson himself took 2 arrows in the neck, thus ending the Viking Age. The English preferred to use Viking with the scorn because of their ferocious behavior. Okay, so interesting what they say about these things, but again, going back to the Frisian giants and what the Vikings were doing there, these are the more deeper things we can postulate about these things and their relationships with other peoples around the world. Okay, establishing trade and relationships in this sort of dynamic is more beneficial to any sort of especially when the people are in greater numbers and maybe just as ferocious fighters, perhaps even larger people you wouldn't want to tangle with. All right, so why not be better? You want the copper. Okay, where's all this copper coming from? Well, much of it's dug out of the Michigan Peninsula there. All right, so here are these blue-eyed peoples here that are anomalous peoples here in the Americas. What are they doing here? How long are they here? Were they here because of the Vikings, somehow coming in contact with these peoples or anybody else in the past? Including their postulating the Welsh. They were talking about the Welsh in this article, okay? So they don't know. But here's the only possibilities that they could possibly suggest based on any sort of past that might concur with these things. But if any of these people could get here by boat, so could anybody from the past, including the Windover Bog people, 5,000 and 6,000 years old. All right, see, that's the problem. See, when referring to these accounts. Okay, so if you're going that far back, which certainly the influence of European DNA within the populations of the Americas here. All right, you have to consider these things. Okay, Melungeons, and I had mentioned them in a previous video, I believe, or one of the previous videos I just did. And the Melungeons, who are they? Harry Hubbard has talked about this in his videos about these people, the Portuguese. Okay, so it'd be these Portuguese people, possibly, or anybody who spoke the Portuguese language, including Phoenicians or whatever. Okay, going back far into the ancient past, but just who are these people? And interesting things are said about them, and sort of nonsense things are said about them, but we can only cover so much. I don't want this video to go too incredibly long, but we have to discuss the Melungeons and all these other people that you probably didn't even know about. Perhaps if you're doing this sort of research for a while, you know about the Melungeons. Okay, I think even Terry Carter on his channel does the research for the sort of, the whatchamacallit, the people out there in Utah there, the Mormons there, do some research for them or whatever. I like their research, but, I refer it back to the whole Mormon thing. But they talk about the Melungeons here and who they could possibly be. There's a lot of theories about these things, and you just hear what they say about this whole thing here. It's just chalk it up as a non-starter because they just don't know. Melungeons is a term for numerous tri-racial isolate. Tri-racial isolate, get that term right there, quote unquote, groups of people of the southeastern United States. Historically, the Melungeons were associated with the settlements of the Cumberland Gap area of central Appalachia, which includes portions of East Tennessee, Southwest Virginia, and Eastern Kentucky. Tri-racial describes populations thought to be of mixed European, African, and Native American ancestry. Thought to be. You gotta catch the language in some of these things, you understand? what they think and whatnot. Although there is no consensus on how many such groups exist, estimates range as high as 200. That's an awful lot of groups, and some of these people claim that they are native peoples and native tribes, and they liken themselves more to be sort of these Caucasian sort of white people or these anomalous people, Caucasian looking but with just dark skin and just totally different people altogether. And where did the American native peoples get their pigmentation anyways? It just come out of nowhere. I don't care how many Siberians and Asian people you cross. Nobody comes out with skin like that. Okay. The ancestry and identity of Melungeons has been a highly controversial subject. Secondary sources disagree as to their ethnic, linguistic, cultural, and geographic origins and identity. They might actually accurately be described as a loose collection of families of diverse ethnic origins who migrated to frontier areas, settled near each other, and intermarried, mostly in Hancock and Hawkins counties in Tennessee, nearby areas of Kentucky and Lee County, Virginia. Their ancestors can usually be traced back to colonial Virginia and the Carolinas. They were largely endogamous through the 19th century, marrying primarily within their community until about 1900. So this whole sort of cockamamie history here, because it says their ancestors can usually be traced back to colonial Virginia and the Carolinas. They usually can, but maybe not so much. All right, and the DNA evidence is not bearing them out. We're going to talk about that too. Melungeons have been defined and documented as having multiracial ancestry. They did not exhibit characteristics that can be classified as those of a single racial phenotype. Most modern day descendants of Appalachian families traditionally regarded as Melungeon are generally European American in appearance, often, though not always, with dark hair and eyes and a swarthy or olive complexion. Description of Melungeons have varied widely over time. In the 19th and early 20th century, they were sometimes identified as Portuguese, quote unquote Native American, or light skinned African American. During the 19th century, free people of color sometimes identified as Portuguese or Native American in order to avoid being classified as black in the segregated slave societies. Other Melungeon individuals and families are accepted and identified as white, particularly since the mid 20th century. They have tended to marry white, quote unquote, since before the 20th century. Okay, so this is a strategy done by peoples there, consciously or unconsciously or whatever, because this is what directed to them in sort of a primitive backdrop of our own mechanics. Unfortunately, as we, turn into mud people of every variety, and eventually all mud people, maybe the Eloy and, the people of the time machine there, the Morlocks. Scholars and commentators do not agree on who should be included under the term Melungeon. Contemporary authors identify differing lists of surnames to be included as families associated with Melungeons. The English surname Gibson and Irish surname Collins appear frequently. Genealogist Pat Elder calls them core surnames. Barty Collins and Shep Gibson had settled in Hancock County, and they and other Melungeons are documented by land deeds, slave sales, and marriage licenses. This is attempts to prove their existence as far back as they can prove it, but nothing makes it more than, of course, the DNA evidence. The only problem is, again, the window of our people. The original meaning of the word Melungeon is obscure. See etymology below. From about the mid 19th to late 20th century, referred exclusively to one triracial isolate group. Descendants of the multiracial Collins, Gibson, and several other related families at Newman's Ridge, Vardy Valley, and other settlements in and around Hancock and Hawkins counties, Tennessee. Okay, so they talk about these possible origins here, and these mixed blood populations, but they don't know anything. This is pure speculation on the part of an early anthropologists and whatever sort of anthropology they can gain out of it. Okay, so I'm talking about in 2012, genealogist Robert Aston and fellow researchers reported that Melungeon lines linked originated in unions of black and white indentured servants living in Virginia in the mid 1600s, before slavery became widespread. Okay, saying the indentured servants were doing these things. Okay, whether that is true or not, they can't possibly know that. Okay, and of course, again the window bog people just throw the whole thing, okay, into reverse. So they concluded that as laws were put in place to prevent mixing of races, these family groups intermarried with each other, creating an endogamous group. They migrated together, sometimes along with white neighbors from Western Virginia through the Piedmont frontier of North Carolina, before settling primarily in the mountains of East Tennessee. In addition, the Melungeon DNA Project has documented multi-racial racial ancestry, primarily European and African, for numerous people identified as Melungeon, affirming the evidence from written documentation. But we're going to take a look at that in a second, okay? And all this evidence is anthropological evidence. None of this is the DNA evidence, okay? So the Melungeon Core DNA testing program, we're going to take a look at that in a section. We talk about assimilation. Of course, they were all assimilated, and who are these people now? And acceptance, they were really given a bad time, okay? They would demonize people, they would look down upon every race, and it's these backward people, etc., are treated quite badly by society, okay? We talk about these legends here about them, okay? So they're saying about all these different postulations, these legends about it, okay? In spite of being culturally and linguistically similar to their European neighbors, these multiracial families were of sufficiently different physical appearance to provoke speculation as to their identity and origins. In the first half of the 19th century, the pejorative term Melungeon began to be applied to these families by local white European American neighbors. Local knowledge, quote unquote, or myths soon began to arise about them. According to historian Pat Elder, the earliest of these that they were quote unquote Indian, more specifically Cherokee. Jack Goins identified Melungeon descendant, and researcher states that Melungeons claimed to be both Indian and Portuguese. The example was Spanish Peggy Gibson, wife of Barty Collins. A few ancestors may have been of mixed Iberian, Spanish, or Portuguese and African origin. Historian Ira Berlin has noted that some early slaves and free blacks of the charter generation in the colonies were Atlantic Creoles, mixed race descendants of Iberian workers of African women from slave ports in Africa. Their male descendants grew up bilingual and accompanied Europeans as workers or slaves. The majority of Melungeon early ancestors had migrated from Virginia over time, or of Northern European and African ancestry, given the history of settlement in late 17th, 18th, early 18th century. Early, Eastern Virginia. Later generations in Tennessee intermarried with descendants of Scotch-Irish immigrants who arrived in the mid to late 18th century and settled in the backcountry before the American Revolution. Given historical evidence of Native American settlement patterns, Cherokee Nation descent is highly unlikely for the original Melungeon ancestral families. These families were formed during the colonial era in the Virginia and Tidewater areas, which were not Cherokee territory. Some of their descendants may have later intermarried with isolated individuals of Cherokee or other Native American ancestry in East Tennessee. Melungeons in Graysville, Tennessee, claim Cherokee ancestors. Anthropologist E. Raymond Evans wrote in 1979 regarding these claims. In Graysville, the Melungeons strongly denied their black heritage and explained their genetic differences by claiming to have Cherokee grandmothers. Many of the local whites also claimed Cherokee ancestry and appear to accept the Melungeon claim. In 1999, historian C.S. Everett hypothesized that John Collins, recorded as a Sappaning Indian who was expelled from Orange County, Virginia, about January 1743, might be the same man as the Melungeon ancestor John Collins, classified as a mulatto, quote unquote, in 1755 North Carolina records, but has revised that theory after having discovered evidence that these were two different men named John Collins. Only descendants of the latter man, identified as mulatto in the 1755 record in North Carolina, has any proven connection to the Melungeon families of eastern Tennessee. See how things are mixed up? And there's no proof here. Other peoples frequently suggested as Melungeon ancestors of the Black Dutch and the Powhatan Indian group. The Powhatan were Algonquin-speaking tribe who inhabited eastern Virginia when the English first arrived. Speculation about Melungeon origins continued during the 19th and 20th centuries. Writers recounted folk tales of shipwrecked sailors, lost colonists, hoards of silver, and ancient peoples such as the Carthaginians or Phoenicians, which each tried new elements were added to the mythology surrounding this group, and more surnames were added to the list as possible Melungeon ancestors. Journalist Will Allen Dromgoole wrote several articles on Melungeons in the 1890s. In the late 20th century, amateur researchers suggested that the Melungeons' ethnic identity may include ancestors who were Turks and Sephardi. Iberian Jews. The writers David Beers Quinn and Ivan Noel Hume theorized that Melungeons were descended from Sephardi Jews who fled the Inquisition and came as sailors to North America. They also say that Francis Drake did not repatriate all the Turks he saved from the sack of Cartagena, but some came in colonies. But Janet Crane notes that there is no written documentation to support this theory. The paper on the Melungeon DNA project, published by Paul Hynek, Jack Goins, and Roberta Estes in the Journal of Genetic Genealogy, shows that ancestry of the sample is primarily European African, with only one person having a Native American paternal haplotype. There is no genetic evidence to support the Turkish or Jewish ancestry theories. Okay, so I talked about this on my channel about the Native Americans and their DNA and everything. These weird European haplogroups going around in the DNAs of the Americas that just don't make any sense. Okay, they seem to be primarily European on the east and west coast. All right, where they come from and how they got there and everything else that they just don't understand. And everything is an amalgam of all these different DNAs. Even all Native Americans say there is no pure DNA. They're all mixed up. Okay, there's no way of telling these things, and they admit it themselves. Okay, let's go to the Melungeon DNA project and what the conclusions are. All right, I'm going to skip right to the conclusions. All right, let's skip to the end here, all right, so we can find out what it is. There is no proof regarding the parentage of Barty Collins, considered the patriarch of the Melungeons. Barty Collins' DNA belonged to the R1A1 1A European haplogroup. His wife, Margaret Gibson, nicknamed Spanish Peggy, showed positive for maternal haplogroup H. Gibson is thought to be the daughter of Andrew Gibson, R1B1B2 group. The DNA test shows the regional origin of the original ancestors of direct male or female lines, but not which culture their descendants may have identified with in succeeding years. Neither does it indicate how far back the admixture occurred. Okay, so in other words, they can't tell anything when all these things came together, when it occurred, and all this kind of stuff. So you can throw it all out the window. You can suppose to kingdom come about all of these people and whatnot. And look, it's not only the Melungeons, okay, if you didn't know about all these different peoples in the Americas here. It's not just simply the Melungeons, it's a bunch of people you never heard about. Okay, so let's take a look at some of these people and you can think about these things. Okay, I have it here somewhere. All right, where is it? I know it's here somewhere. And there's a whole bunch of other people in the Americas that are associated with these things. I'm trying to find the article here. I think it's this one. Okay, here's the similar groups. All right, just not to make this video too lengthy here, but we have to talk about all these things. Okay, groups you never heard of, other than the Melungeons, and these blue-eyed, blonde-haired peoples up there in the north part of North America. There running around. The Nanakoke Lenape people are a tribal confederation of Nanakoke of Delamar Peninsula and Lenape of southern New Jersey and northern Delaware. They were recognized by the state of New Jersey, having reorganized and maintained elected governments. Okay, so here they also, these similar multiracial groups, okay, but some of these are contemporary groups, you have to remember, but some of these go back further in time. The Dominicans are small biracial or triracial ethnic group that was once centered in the Florida Panhandle county of Holmes, in a corner of the southern part of the county, west of the Choctawhatchee River, near the town of Ponce de Leon. Okay, the group was classified in 1950 as one. Okay, so you can read more about these things. All right. The name Besh Ishmael tribe, the tribe of Ishmael, were applied to poor upland southern residents of Indianapolis, Indiana, during the late 19th century because of the supposed association with the Ishmael family. Records of the Ishmael family show that it originally hailed from Cumberland. Okay, so Cumberland County, I'm sure. All right. Red bones. Red bone is a term historically used much of the southern United States to denote a multiracial individual or culture. In Louisiana, it also refers to specific geographically and ethnically distinct groups. Piscataway Indian Nation, also called Piscataway, is a state-recognized tribe in Maryland that is descended from historic Piscataway people. At the time of European encounter, the Piscataway was one of the most populous and powerful native polities, okay, there in New Jersey and New York. Piscataways. Ramapo Mountain Indians, also known as Ramapo Lenape Nation, Nation, or Ramapo Lenape Munsee Delaware Nation, are a group of approximately 5,000 people living in the Ramapo Mountains of Bergen and Passaic counties in northern New Jersey. Okay, again, what Verrazano saw of these people. The Coree were a very small Native American tribe who once occupied a coastal area south of the Neuse River in the southeastern North Carolina, an area now covered by the Carteret and Craven counties. Early 20th century scholars were unsure of what language they spoke. Hallowasaponi is a Native American people recognized as a tribe by the state of North Carolina. They are located in the northeastern Piedmont area. The Hallowasaponi hold membership on the North Carolina Commission on Indian Affairs. So these are all these orphaned, strange people, anomalous people. Lumber Tribe of North Carolina. Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina is a state-recognized tribe in North Carolina, numbering approximately 55,000 enrolled members, most of them living primarily in Robeson, Hope, Cumberland, and Scotland counties. The Lumbee Tribe is the largest state tribe in North Carolina. Person County Indians are a Native American group living in Person County, North Carolina, United States, who were officially recognized by an act of North Carolina legislature in 1920. Some of these people trying to get recognition here. Carmel Indians of Highland County are a group of Melungeons who moved from Magaffin County, Kentucky, and live in Highland County in Ohio. Bryson Gibson and Valentine Collins are ancestors to most of the group, paternal line descendants of Bryson Gibson and Valentine Collins. Okay, we just mentioned those before. Redbone is a term historically used to most of the southern United States to denote a multiracial individual group. In Louisiana, it refers to a specific geographic and ethnically distinct group. Turks, the Turks of South Carolina, is known as Sumter Turks or Turks of Sumter County, are a group of people that have lived in the general area of Sumter County, South Carolina, since the late 1700s. According to Professor Glenn Browder, they have always been a tight-knit and isolated community. Brass Ankles of South Carolina was a triracial isolate group as defined by anthropologists. They developed in the colonial era. They lived as free people of color successfully in the areas of Goose Creek, South Carolina, Holly Hills, South Carolina, as they increasingly whatever. I'm just showing you all of these people. The Monacan Indian Nation is one of the 11 Native American tribes recognized since the late 20th century by the Commonwealth of Virginia, United States. In January 2018, Congress passed an act that provides federal recognition of tribes to the Monacan and 5 other tribes. Okay, so these people are, it's Indian groups, actual Indians. Chestnut Ridge people are a mixed race community concentrated in an area north of Philippi, Barber County, in north central West Virginia, with smaller related communities, but all over the place, as you see. All right. Can they determine any of these things? No. Okay, I just showed you in the Melungeon DNA product. These are completely inconclusive, and all their speculation is based on what they can glean from speculation of early anthropologists, because there is no other explanation. It can't be any of these groups here prior to what they're talking about. But unfortunately, again, as I said about the Windover Bog people, all right, these people who had fabric, had different skeletal type. Okay, discussed in my video here, the window over Bog people, all right, how this panel convened in 2015 because they're not happy with the DNA results. It keeps on reflecting this European DNA some 5 to 6,000 years ago. Okay, so where could all of these anomalous people be getting their DNA? Well, it goes into a far more ancient past and a far different past than we're being that's even reckoned or speculated on in these articles. Okay, even by universities, even though they're willing to speculate on Norse exploration of Americas, but nothing more than that. Okay, perhaps Welsh. Okay, but there's more evidence of more ancient connections here in the Americas to peoples, other civilizations outside of the Americas in the past, traveling long distances, perhaps when the sea levels were a lot lower in these thousands of years ago, as John Jensen suggests, when all these ancient artificial harbors here, like on Long Island, for example, 2,000 foot long. What, for little canoes? I don't think so. So major things were going on here, and the stone walls of New England reflect those things as well. Okay, and a different sort of people here. Okay, with different phenotypes as suggested by these things. Okay, doing things here like the stone walls of New England and other things here back to Neolithic times. Okay, many peoples were here over the many, many millennia. Okay, and it's just more proof of it. But what were they doing here with the place already occupied by people? Well, there's lots of things going on in the past, evidently, because the civilizations in the Americas goes far into the ancient past, 20,000 years, 30,000 years, as they're finding in the Americas. Mainstream anthropologists are scratching their heads and saying, well, this is just far earlier than anything we can record of the ancient past anywhere around the world of organized societies here in the Americas. All right. So, look, these ideas of these people with these DNAs in them sort of suggest a more cosmopolitan Americas. Okay. And I've covered again in my videos here, going further back into the past. If we take the Windover site, which the DNA was done by an independent laboratory, I show it from the Science Channel video where they were trying to establish, that there's something, proof here of European contact in the Americas some 5 to 6,000 years ago. Okay, and he's the head anthropologist of the University of Florida, Florida U. Okay, with this woman who wrote the book about the DNA, had this argument with some comments on a different video about the Windover Bog people, where this guy insisted, well, she wrote a book about the DNA, and on here they are trying to contract somebody to come in and verify the DNA is official Native American so they could lay it to rest, but nobody's willing to do that. They're not willing to put their name on it. They look at the research or whatever and say, I'll put my name on it because it would be wrong. Okay, and that's a big boo-boo to make, especially not considering what our past really might be. All right, guys, well, I just wanted to go through that with you, and just wanted you to think about these things, these anomalous peoples in North America here, and what the past could possibly be more like, the sort of cosmopolitan civilization with various trading groups. going back into the past for various resources and materials. I'm sure even to past what we might call Atlantis, although that's what we call it. We have no idea what they call themselves if there was an Atlantis. That's our name for it, okay? Something like that, because the Atlantic is named for them, right? So, and that's the earliest reference to them. But who knows what they call themselves, all right? So anyway, guys, I hope you liked the video and enjoyed that. And just very strange about these very anomalous peoples here in North America here, and how this all came about and what the past is really like. Anyway, guys, please do hit the like button if you like the video. And if you're not a subscriber, please do subscribe. We tackle all these very different ideas about the past and how we can reckon with the other material that we discuss on this channel. Anyway, guys, Budcat7 signing out. A peace.